studying history, about the past that comes from, not from textbooks or teachers, but from Hollywood, right? Is there anything wrong with it? Or could there be a problem whenever we learn from films? There's plenty of problems, right? We will discuss towards the end. I will try to bring forward so that we somehow also, Bolsonaro is not somehow welcome here, persona non grata, I assume. Oh, good, okay. And so, yes, on the one hand, when we say that films are efficient to be used in education, on the other hand, it's also important to say that they need to be used properly, right? Because film is a very specific kind of a language that we must understand. We need to understand how this language works, because it can be easily understood by simple watching. It can be also very easily misunderstood. Or the set of information that we receive when watching a film can be, understood as a piece of truth. And that's really dangerous, because when watching a film, we're not watching reality. That's something, again, that needs to be understood, not just teachers, but you have to be able to then distribute this kind of information also onto your students. And so, because it is kind of a language, right, it exposes different realities that we're part of, although the film itself is not reality itself. It just exposes and represents reality. We'll get that whenever I discuss the film language in very brief. But it does visualize role model protagonists, for example. That's very important. Part of my research that I shared with you is masculinity in contemporary American cinema, focusing on how male characters are represented. It's important to understand because it also reveals some kind of tendencies, right? Preferred model identities that we are confronted with as viewers. And we are very likely to somehow embrace those kind of identities. And the kind of specific kind of a language that is used in cinema makes us, in a way, affiliate or like or dislike or something, identify with those representations. And it's really important to understand how this actually works when we want to use film in the classroom. Yes, I will skip this because it's not that important. We will discuss that in a greater detail. Yes, this is what I want to focus on for now, just to be able to make clear that we understand, because I've already proposed the idea that film is some kind of a language. It is not the kind of a language that we use. It's not verbal language, obviously, but it's a set of different aspects that contribute to understand the language, right? The definition that I use says that film is a sophisticated art form that incorporates language, which is a way of knowing and doing things shared by filmmakers and audiences. It is some kind of a paradigm, right? Paradigm or a combination of different aspects. Those aspects can be formal and informal. And the combination, the constellation of those aspects creates something that we then observe and consume. Consume very often, not really critically. And that's when a problem arises. But also a form of representation to talk to audiences. So whatever you happen to watch in a film, whatever you feel, what the characters are feeling. Whether you're falling in love, you should be falling in love with them. Whether they're scared, you should be scared with them, right? Whenever they're frightened or disappointed or something, you should feel the same. That's when a film is well made. But it should be also intellectually intriguing. So after the film, it should somehow, make you wonder, make you question, make you discuss, make you talk about the film, right? Those are the two things that a good film should. So whenever you feel via this emotional fix that a film manages to create with you, you also, in a way, identify. And it's this kind of process that's, again, in theory, Krital, she wants to be with me. That Yeah, the process of identification is extremely important in the theory, in understanding the theory of representation. When you watch strong female lead characters, right? You aspire to be like them, right? Because they are so brave, they are so courageous, they're so beautiful, they're so whatever. You want to be like them, right? That's what role modeling is about. Or, different kind of model. We all have different models that we want to aspire to and we somehow take to. And it's a way of talking to audiences, also in a way to influence us because they do affect how we feel about our realities. Because after watching a film, you turn around to your own reality, right? And you live it with the idea in your mind. Although perhaps we all understand because we're adults, we're, somehow sane enough to understand that watching a film is not watching a reality, not our reality, right? That's why we go watch horror films, for example. We want to feel scared, right? Because we know it's not our life, it's not our experience. We just feel it. And that's what's really tempting, right? But then you turn around and you're safe in your own room, in your own space, when nothing scary is going on. That's all right, right? But you have some kind of images installed in your head, images that are related to main characters that, thank you, that you tend to, refer to in your own reality that is inherently altered. They saw that film, right? It leaves an effect on you somehow. And so, yes, representation matters because cinema matters, right? It talks to you about presenting certain images that you then project and somehow live in your own reality. And I've mentioned the emotional fix that is important to create. And yes, representation. When I start talking about representation, I like to also just to show how it all works and how it all started. I'm not sure you're from film, but let me play it. Maybe I can. Nope. Can you try just clicking on the slide? There should be a button, play button in the center of the yeah. It doesn't have sound. That's okay. This is Georges Méliès. It was 1902 when Georges Méliès, what it look like, what it would look like traveling to the moon, and he created this, right? It is a film because it's a set of pictures in motion. It is someone's fantasy, obviously. That's also one of the reasons why we watch films, because we like to fantasize about unreal things, that's why we all watch sci-fis, for example, films that take us to different dimensions that we are not familiar with, which is, some kind of, there's just some kind of projections of our fantasy, something that cannot happen in our. When it comes to representation, this really matters because I tend to somehow stress the fact that every single film, also those films that stick with realism very much, that are very real, from real experiences of real people, are also just a representation of someone's fantasy. Not necessarily fantasy, but it's definitely someone's perspective. So very often it would be in a way also idealized kind of reality. So romance would be more romantic than in real life, or not really idealized, but made more dramatic, like horror. You get scared, you get much more scared in a horror, right? So everything is overly dramatized for the sake of making a film strong enough for audiences to feel, to have to create this emotional fix. And so it's also important to consider this when understanding film or cinema language, the kind of language that it talks, that it's somehow, presented through someone else's perspective. It's not reality. It's not, an objective picture of reality that we're part of. I also like to show this because it talks about another layer of cinema. And again, there should be a play button in the center. If someone can play it. If you just play it, there should be a play button there as well. Right. And this is from Alfred Hitchcock's film, Rear Window, where the character watches a train as it passes by, right? And she peeks into individual windows, observing someone else's experience, someone else's moments, right? This specific scene talks about voyeurism very much, and about our tendency and pleasure we take into peeking into someone else's life. This is the psychology of cinema, psychology of film. We like to observe someone else's lives, right? But then again, she goes to those windows that are most appealing to her, right? That love to become part of. She would also love to dance like that. She dreams about dancing like that. And unfortunately, we don't have this sound, but then she's called to join the train, the people on the train, by this man, right? So he literally says, why don't you come and join us? And this is what cinema does. It offers you this kind of pleasure, right, to join this experience. And we do like to join. We like this emotion to escape reality and to understand, yes, this is what I needed to get to. That film is, a paradigm that uses specific language. So whatever we see, whatever we're tempted by, is a kind of a language that works specifically, very productively to create this kind. And the language is combined of two things. It is formal and informal conventions, right? Formal, very technical stuff that we're not interested in, but it's very often those technical stuff that create the emotion or that support the emotion that we're supposed to feel, right? I will hopefully talk about this in some of the workshops with you, where I'll try to explain how lighting actually adds to the atmosphere, how sound creates the background, and how different sounds create two totally different scenes, right? And therefore also emotions. And editing is an extremely, I think for me, editing is like the most important film, because with editing, you create a story, you create a meaning. And then there are also informal conventions, which creates the message or ideology. Ideology understood here, not really with negative connotation, but it's simply the message, because every single film has a message, right? Every filmmaker wants to say something with a film or through film. So yes, it is the kind of a message that we receive in a film. I use ideology that is very often used by especially classical Hollywood, because this is what I studied. And so very often in the classical body of American films, you would have optimism like the most important, the most efficient aspect, optimism that transforms into happy endings, right? You don't have a good American film if you don't have a strong happy ending, right? In the classical sense, obviously. Motivation speaks about how individual characters are driven forward, how what they're motivated by, and so on and so forth. And so you also need to have polarity or dichotomy of men versus women, right? If you watch any screwball comedy, easy comedy, it's a battle of sexes. So you have men against women and vice versa. You have a class issue, upper class, lower class. If you watch, well, it happened one night, or It's a Wonderful Life, or any other classic, this would be it. You have individual versus community. An individual struggles. Should I go pursue my own individual interest and becoming, and traveling the world? Or should I stay here within my community and have a family life, right? Those kind of issues that create a drama, create questions that are also familiar to you, to audiences, because we all question, we go through those questions sometimes, or not, but they're somehow kind of problems that we relate to, and it's very important for a film to have problems that audiences relate. Otherwise, it would not be interesting, we would not be able to relate, right? We would just not watch it. And so on and so forth. So those were the conventions. So let me now go to why or how now we should actually use film in our classes, maybe. Right? There are plenty of reasons. I selected just some. what I do in my own classes, I use film, first of all, to visualize some specific experiences that would be extremely difficult to imagine for my students, right? Even for me, obviously. Talking about the history of the United States to the colonial period, yeah, we can talk about it, but it has a totally different effect if you just watch it, if you can actually really see, real people in real time, not in real time, in their time, but you can create some kind of a visual picture. It somehow sticks with you for much longer, you remember it much longer, you learn much more easily like that. And so, yes, first of all, it's just simple visualization that is extremely helpful. Also, to develop empathy. I use it in a different class where I teach social institutions when we talk about racism in the United States, when we talk about women's issues in the United States, when we talk about American Indian movement in American society. All those are extremely important topics to be discussed. But when they're just discussed, I can have any material I can find from newspapers, magazines, whatever. But whenever I use photography and film, that's when it really hits students. When they see, when they watch, when they feel the experience of individuals struggling, right? And this is what really has a huge impact on how we talk about specific topics. The other day, not the other day, but last semester, I asked students to discuss one battle after another. Have you seen the film? Anyone? No, strongly recommend this one. So, yeah, simply films that talk about social issues, their resonant social issues, contemporary issues, troubling issues, right? That we get to identify with. We're also part of a society, and we also, go through individual problems that we may struggle with. And so we get to identify, and also it's much more, it's easier to discuss them with your students. So also this is very much related, talking about controversial issues, right? It's not very easy to break ice when talking about issues that perhaps are not that easy to talk about. So that can also be some kind of an icebreaker. An important part of all this would be the last part that says to develop interpretive and analytical skills. Because along with the actual discussion that you're having, talking about the history of the United States, you also, by using film and by saying that this is someone's perspective, that this film was produced by this and that studio, and it features this and that actor, actress, you also teach film literacy, because it's very important to point some specific things about the production of a film out in order to make your students understand that they're watching a film. Because film is not reality. Again, it's not a textbook, and it's not truth. It's not absolute truth, right? And I will try to show you also how it's done. You can use film as a primary or secondary source, or even as both, right? I very often use film as a secondary source to give another perspective, because, for example, when I teach American social issues, let's say talking about immigration, yes, I would add theory. I would ask students to read theory. I would then give them plenty of articles from New York Times or whatever to read, to reflect on, the theory. And then I would add this film that I just mentioned, One Battle After Another, to have a different perspective, to have the third perspective, because excuse me, the more perspectives you have, the clearer picture you have, and the more you get to information you gather from the discussion itself, right? And also you get to have you can have a very fruitful discussion. So, for example, I like to use those two examples, Bonnie and Clyde or Forrest Gump. Bonnie and Clyde can be used in both cases, like to be used as a primary source, but also secondary source. It was produced in 1967 as a film talking about the Great Depression in the United States. And it's really funny because although talking about the Great Depression, which was roughly 1930s in the United States, it talks back about 1960s. So it historicizes a topic from American history. It returns back to history in order to talk about the issues of American society of 1960s in a very nice way, in a very specific way. So using the characters of Bonnie and Clyde, who are both criminals, but it romanticizes criminals who fight against the establishment, which was the fight of young people in the 60s, right? So it creates this kind of a parallel. It basically presents those main characters in order to talk about very contemporary issues. And that's a very important kind of a moment to realize, because I always tell my students that any film that they watch, always, no matter how historical it seems, or no matter how much into history, or no matter which historical event it discusses, it always talks about current issues. Because for you, viewers, or it would not be interesting if it talked about problems of people in way back in 1920s. It has to talk current language. It has to talk your language. It has to talk to you, not to people in 1920s. And so, yes, that's also very important to bear in mind. Also, for example, Forrest Gump. It's one of the films that I also researched in my dissertation for PhD, is a film that goes throughout the history of the United States, throughout most of the 20th century, right? As if. But does it really? Right, that's the question that I like to ask my students, and we go through individual parts, periods of American history that are described in the film, and we discuss them, how accurately they're the film, right? What's the problem of this specific portrayal of American history? Is it just a celebration of American history or American greatness, or is it more of a critical approach to it? And so on and so forth. So you can break individual things into pieces to, in a way, discuss how this film interprets American history. On the other hand, how it also contributes to how American history is presented to also, international audiences, because this film is so well known. It's been watched more by foreigners than by Americans themselves. So yes, it reveals a lot of identity politics. Identity politics is like a huge area that we could be talking about for years, not just in one. So I'm just going to largely skip that. I didn't know I had this. Sorry about that. So now I will just try to break into pieces one film that I use in my class, just for you to observe slightly more what needs to be taken, because it's not just about, again, talking about the film, what the film presents. This is Terrence Malick and his New World that he made. Let me go back into 2005. I like to use the whole credits here just to point some things out, because just by presenting credits, you learn a lot about the film, about the perspective of the film, right? It's not just the history of the United States. It's not just a film about how the New World was explored and started to be explored, how it was discovered. It talks a lot also about the behind, right? So we learned that the director and writer was both Terrence Malick. Terrence Malick is a very authorial kind of a filmmaker. That means that he has a very specific approach to his films. He has the full creative control, no one else. So it is his film, just like all of the others. He doesn't let anyone control how he presents things. He's a very poetic kind of a filmmaker. I love him very much. And it's very visible in his signature through and through. So again, if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend. It's a very, very good film anyway. But then if you look at who is starring in the film, I'm not sure you're familiar with the story of how the New World was established, founded in a way. This is a story of Jamestown. Jamestown was the very first permanent colony that was established in the area of Virginia. So the very first English colony that meant the beginning of the United States, right? And so Jamestown was a very tiny outpost of soldiers for a very long time. For several years, it was just a group of soldiers occupying, trying to settle, occupying a region in Virginia. Obviously, the encounters with native population were not really nice, right? And they needed to somehow create a solid ground to be able to defend themselves, and so on, so forth. I don't want to go into this history that much. I'm just trying to explain like the background of what the film is about. And so, in order to stick authenticity, because Terrence Malick is one of those authors who likes to be authentic very much, he also cast two actors. The main male lead character was played by Colin Farrell, and the female, the story of who played the character of Pocahontas. I'm sure you have heard of Pocahontas. She is present in the film, in the story as well, because she was a true character in history. She was a real person, and she played an important role in how in the mediation of she simply mediated relations, Jamestown people, so English newcomers or soldiers, and the Powhatan tribe, right? So she was real, she played an important role in it. And in the main character was played by, I'm not sure I pronounce it well, but I'll try. It's Koryanka Kilcher. Kilcher resembles, it is supposed to be a Alaskan name, but her origin is, and I just now forgot entirely, not just entirely native. It was native blended with, I can't remember right now, but it was a totally different kind of a background of her origin. She was born in Germany, right? She was cast because she resembled a Native American character that needed to be presented in the character of Pocahontas. So it also adds more information about how the filmmaker cast his cast, basically. And the only truly authentic part about the film, besides the story that is authentic, he really did stick with authentic historic material, is the location. It is happening in the story in the film, Italy in Virginia, in pristine area of where Jamestown was basically founded. Right? So what we need to learn, from simple visualization, this is the primary goal that I like my students to focus on, right? They visualize a piece of history that I like them to learn. Not just to learn, I don't ask them to learn, specific story. I want them to understand what it felt like for natives to feel and to see and to experience newcomers coming into their own land, right? And I could not find better words or any words to describe it. I use the film to describe it because you really need to feel it to understand what it must have felt like, right? Someone else walking into your own house saying, okay, we're staying, right? And so on and so forth. Because from this, there's a whole, line of different stories that we go into in greater detail and we discuss. So, yes, it was also those harsh conditions that are present in the film that it's also very important for me to make students understand because, it has a point, and we then again go into details in discussing the overall experience. But what's really important, along with this, that we get to understand, the experiences, but then it is my turn to jump into this and explain the music in the film, right? Right at the beginning, when we see the ships approaching the land, so actually, when it happens, we hear Wagner playing, on the background, right? Which is a very European classical music. It's not much related to the experience at all, so it adds a different kind of a aspect to how we understand the film. It makes sense when it comes to how it gradates, how the music develops. It adds the atmosphere. It adds to the atmosphere. It adds the grandiosity and everything. So it is very efficiently used. But the music itself is not really fitting. So that's an option. And to, in order to question it, you need to understand what kind of music it is, right? Also, there is a voiceover throughout the whole film. We very rarely get to see real dialogues going on, obviously, for obvious reasons. The two main characters didn't understand each other, but we hear their thoughts, right? But both of the languages that are used in those voiceovers are English, right? Which doesn't, again, make much sense because Koreanka or the Pocahontas didn't speak the language, right? So again, we understand that there is some kind of a prism imposed onto the viewer, right? So we get to see two different perspectives, but we get to see only one, actually, right? And so on and so forth. So we dig deeper into understanding how the language is composed to present something, right? And it's important to understand that. And again, we have those layers of the narrative. Is the story really about historical event? Is it a story about event, the discovery of the land, how it happened? Or is it a romantic story of two people who fell in love, who never actually did fall in love, right? There was just a mutual collaboration. But the film, obviously, in order to, again, create emotional fix, to make you feel, needs to add the romantic layer, because it wouldn't work otherwise. So yeah, in this sense, you get to question how accurate the film is. This one is accurate, but not all historical films are accurate. So accuracy, especially when it comes to the depiction of historical events, needs to be questioned, right? Because we tend to learn about history. I like to tell this story that I like to share whenever I travel, because I would never be able to share this with my home audience, fearing that my mother would hear me. Once I got a phone call from my mom, and she was sharing a film she was watching. Was it a TV series? I'm not sure now. But then she said, "Oh, I was watching this whatever about, Queen Mary. No, I didn't know she was like that." And I'm like, yeah, that's interesting. But Mom, it's a film. It's not reality. It's not real life. So yeah, just be aware of that. You always spoil everything for me. That was her response, right? So yeah, don't take everything you watch for granted, especially not when it comes to history, because very often it's simply just distorted somehow. So yeah, I don't mean to be that paranoid, but it's always nice just to be aware of the basics. Anyway, yeah, another example that I like to use in film to, for example, talk about racism, a contemporary, although kind of outdated now, it's 2004, Crash. It's a very good example I like to use to talk about racism, because it's a film composed of different characters who each of them brings forward their own experience. We even get to see the experience or the perspective of the one who acts in a very racist way. Right? So we have different from different ethnic, racial backgrounds sharing their life stories with us, with audiences. But then we get to see also the story of a white character, of a racist character that we are asked to identify with as well. Or in a way, we are asked to, empathize with as well. It's an interesting thing because empathy is tremendously important in, talking about how we identify with individual characters, how much we allow ourselves to empathize with characters, and how much restrained we are, right? And so on and so forth. So when it comes to controversial or any topics, film is very, very useful. And so talking about, women's rights in American society. I love to use this one. Mona Lisa is like a classic already. A Mona Lisa smile. If you haven't seen it, again, highly recommend it. So not only talking about women's issues, but also about history, the post-war period, education available, not really available to women in American society, compared to our situation. You know, comparative analysis is also something that works very well. You can always use it to compare. The holdovers, perhaps something more recent, very, very nice. I love it because, again, it plays with the very idea that it talks about history, right? It talks about 1950s, if I'm not mistaken. It was made in the original thing was made in 1974, and this was made in 2023. It mimics the period of 1970s when it comes to the technical production, because it uses an old camera that was used in the 70s to specifically or authentically produce film with this specific grain. Was characteristic of the cinema of the 70s, and so on and so forth. So it's basically playing with different periods, referring to different periods on many different layers, right? But yeah, highly recommend this one if you haven't seen it. Again, talking about many different issues: the position of men and women in society, education, available, not available, boarding schools, different social status in American society at that very specific period. So yeah. But perhaps something more interesting for you, to teach language. I think film is a very efficient kind of a tool to teach language, because yes, obviously, if it's not dubbed, then you acquire the language very easily, right? I also had a discussion the other day with a colleague of mine from Uzbekistan, asking me how come that our students in Slovakia are, much better in English than theirs in Uzbekistan. And I referred, or I somehow replied that perhaps it's also because our media, they present most of the English spoken content not really dubbed, so we just read subtitles, so we get the original sound and spoken word. So we acquire language like this because you listen to the music. Also, this is my third time in Brazil. Before coming here, I was very scared of the language. I was terrified of the melody of Brazilian Portuguese, and I struggled. So I would start listening Brazilian music quite a lot, and I've listened to everything. I've got Oterno and I don't know what else. But anyway, and so yes, but listen, obviously, you know that more than me. You acquire the melody, you acquire the rhythm and everything. So watching the film or film as such is extremely efficient when it comes to teaching the language itself, right? You have plenty of examples that you can develop, plenty of examples of things that you can develop when teaching the language. Just choose, parts of a film, for example, from E.T., one of my favorite films that I like to watch with the kids. You just start talking about friendship, right? It develops the topic of friendship very well. So, your students get to acquire vocabulary related to friendship. Then you ask them to talk about their friends. So they, learn. You can somehow work with that quite well. There are plenty of textbooks that actually use examples from films like this. So role models, obviously, is also something that you can use in order to talk about specific parts of the language. To teach literature and arts, right? Just simple biographies of, people. Again, not really without questioning, because it's always nice to compare with real biographies, just like Kafka, the latest film about Kafka. I don't know if you've seen it, but it does talk about Kafka, but about a specific period part in his life, the very end, for example, right? So you need to explain what was before and how he ended up there. But yeah, it gives you something to talk about, something to use to make your lesson or the discussion about specific authors more interesting, or Mary Cassatt, or anything else. But again, along with this, you get to develop film literacy as well. Because again, you point out that this specific film talks about this person from this perspective. Just by pointing out the different perspective, you teach your students film literacy, which is extremely important to add when you use film. Geography, right? Any Western, you get to talk about landscape, you get to talk landscapes, you get to talk about anything that is related to geography and vocabulary related to that. So yes, but also you get to develop it further. So for example, you have urban versus rural, and within urban, for example, you talk about New York, you talk about Manhattan, you go deeper into something more cultural. So let's say West Side Story or any other film that talks about this kind of a culture. You can talk about mathematics and physics as well, right? Oppenheimer would be like the latest example where you can dig deeper and discuss the theory with your students even, right? So yeah, don't be afraid to use anything, any material that you find in film to talk about anything, even physical activity that I love to use anytime, whenever. I'm also one of the coordinators of a film festival in my hometown. It's called, it translates as The Mountain and the City. It's about, the mountain film, where we screen films, latest films about skiing, about running, about whatever. And yes, you can motivate, you can use this also in your class if you teach this. So yeah, as a motivation, talking about not just courage and motivation, but also about endurance and physical health, for example, and also problems that individual athletes need to overcome, being women, being men also, and just things that were that you need to discuss. So yes, there are plenty of films that we can choose from, and I dare say that there is not one film that would not or could not be used to teach something, right? Because you can basically find anything in every single film, but there are some challenges, right? First of all, I mentioned that it's very important to, in a way, be able to explain again about the perspective, and that it's not reality that we're watching, that it's someone's reality, not necessarily ours. It's not the truth, right? It's always somehow idealized or dramatized or whatever, right? That's something that we need to be aware of. Also, that there is, a very thin line between education and entertainment. So entertainment can be education as well, and vice versa. And we just need to be able to somehow, process this and share it with our students. Inaccuracy, I've mentioned that, especially when talking about history. Inaccuracy of the most important things to be aware of, although this can also be used to teach history, right? You choose the most historically inaccurate film and you ask your students to correct it. Easy as that. And they learn from this, right? Making, correcting mistakes in a film, they get to learn. And it's fun to learn like this. And also, just those romantic and dramatic layers that have this tendency to overshadow this informative value or the value of the we need to get. It's also the reduced information, things that are omitted, skipped, invisible, simply because they didn't fit the narrative. That's important to mention, that they're not there because it was someone else's decision. It's not that they were not present, but it was someone else's decision, or the filmmaker's decision. And so on and so forth, all the way to this, perhaps the most important, that films themselves are not lessons, right? They're not textbooks. Again, they're not history. So we need to be aware of that. We need to talk about this with our students. And yes, it says that inappropriateness of film selection, so be aware of the age group you're talking to, that's it, right? But that's something that is very obvious. So yeah, I put this large for all of us to, in a way, understand that there is this really need for an active guidance of the teacher. You need to be able to talk about the film in a way that the students not only get the information, but also understand how the information is presented in the film. Right? So again, it goes hand with teaching your students film literacy, because we need to understand that it's just a language. Although, or no matter how much we like to be, right, here enjoying our film all the time, we also should be aware what we're watching. So yeah, sorry, there should be a thank you. I made it there. So yes, that was a bit of theory. So now the floor is somehow yours as well, because I'd like to, learn your experience. Sorry, go back to this. Thank you, thank you. So yes, I'd like to, learn your experience. Whether you ever use film for any purposes other than entertainment, and what is your feeling about using film in the classroom or whatever. Can I just put this away now? Can I put this away now so that I can talk to the rest? Okay, so if they ask questions, should I just hand it to them? Okay, perfect. So yeah, feel free to add, comment on, ask anything. Yes, perfect.
So, what's your favorite movie and why?
Thank you. Yes, thank you, thank you. Yes, as always, I reply, I don't have a favorite movie, and I know why, because there are so many. Right? I don't have a favorite film. I have like my first films that meant a lot or somehow put a mark on the film map for me, but I don't have a favorite one. Do I have to?
In Brazil, it's how we do.
I did. Okay, well, there are two first films for me. One would be Julio Medem's Lucia y el Sexo. That would be like one. And the other was, and now, see, it's the Deep Blue. Deep Blue, yeah. Another film. Those were two first films for me. There was also a third one that I don't remember right now. But yeah. What's my favorite Brazilian movie? Okay, now I can hide this T-shirt. It's not actually Secret Agent, I must confess. It's not Secret Agent because then I saw, or before even, I saw Último Azul. I'm not sure you're familiar with it. It's from this region. I think it was filmed in this region because I fell in love with it because of that. But also because it talks about, it talks ecology, right? The way it's produced, it's made, it's the region. And this is something I really love about film, being able to talk without talking, actually, without saying things. You just feel it, and that's why I really enjoy the film. But then I also watched others. I do like very much. Besides those two, I also watched. I can't remember right now. When I'm nervous, I don't remember things. So let me think about that. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I can't remember. Okay. Other questions?
Martina.
Yes.
Do you have questions there? No. Okay. Oh, by the way, it was a really, how do I say that? Thought-provoking, presentation, because I was like taking a lot of notes here, believe me, super cool. And but I don't know if my question is a sort of, I don't know, silly, but I couldn't see the precise definition of the films you used before, but if I have like a narrative, can I consider any narrative as a film? For example, about documentaries, using documentaries in my lessons. So documentaries can be viewed as films too, or not? Oh, cool. Yeah.
It's a different genre, but yeah, documentary would be like the most. Documentary films would be like the most efficient way to use film, right? I mean, it's the most used kind of a genre, but definitely yes. But it's also kind of important to bear in mind that they're produced somehow by someone, and it's always nice to at least the basics. But see the production company, let's say, at least right. It's what I think. But yeah, documentary would be the. But again, when it comes to documentary, you can have documentaries that also distort, the narrative, national narrative in a way that can somehow add different perspective and stuff like that. So, what do you teach when you use documentary films?
For example, last time I was teaching autobiographies or autobiographies. So I use. I've got her name right now. Isabella Allende's documentary about her life and what happened to her daughter, Paola. So, yeah. In general, have you ever heard of Cracks, like Evergreen's film, Cracks? It's about a swimming teacher, in a boarding school. And there were some scenes I like to use, like when she says, what's the most important thing in life? And then I start with discussion about what are important things. And then she says, like, desire.
Oh.
And then when she uses this word like desire, if you have desire, you can have everything. So yeah, I used to use like with my advanced students, So yeah.
Beautiful.
Indeed, when I was like I don't know, 10 years, I really obsessed by movies, and then I use a lot in my classes because I had another colleague who used songs. So,
oh yeah, that's also very.
And then we compared like how to use songs and how to use
definitely
films.
Yeah, wonderful. We're just sharing. I mean, it's no grand research here, obviously. It's just that I love to use film because it helps with students. Obviously, on this level, it's much more efficient because students are obviously on a different level, so that we can compare historic sources with film. It's much more challenging, I think, when it comes to young learners, for example. So you have to be more precise. I think it's really important to teach also young learners to be able to understand that they're, in a way, getting some kind of a language and to be able to explain how this language works and talks to them. So yeah. Yes.
So, how make your students understand which is a real contest and which is just a fiction contest in the movie?
What I do is that we compare. We have real historic documents. So, for example, we have an author talking about his experience living the thing that we're discussing. So let's say we talk about slavery in American history. So we have different texts. We have Harriet Jacobs' narrative talking about what it was like to be a slave woman. Then we compare it to Hammond, who was a slave owner, and we compare those texts. And then I ask my students to watch a film and compare it with a film. So they actually have true, real narratives of true, authentic people talking about their own experience living the thing. And then we also have the perspective of very contemporary people, how they cope with this specific part of their history. And we get to, obviously, it's not that authentic or as authentic as the real material, real text written by real authors, but we get to come here, and I think that's the most helpful kind of a thing to achieve, different perspective, also to get the contemporary perspective, how contemporary society deals with such an issue as slavery, right? Yeah. But there are also plenty of other ways. What I like to have is, evidence, true historic evidence in my hands and the hands of students as well.
Hello. Professor. Parou de funcionar. Agora. Professor Luis has a question and I'm going to translate it for him. Just a second. Você pode falar?
Como o filme não tem a pretensão, como quando alguém produz um filme ele não tem a pretensão de verdade, não é? Como tu pensas isso na tua análise? Quando a gente produz um artigo científico utilizando filmes em de verdade, como tu pensas isso em relação aos teus trabalhos com análise fílmica?
All right, so since when you create a movie or when you analyze a movie, you know that the movie doesn't really have like an intention to be truthful. It tells a story, but also you work with movies in an academic context. So how do you work the academic context and articles and stuff? And how do you make the movie work in this academic context, since when we are working here, writing articles and things, we need to be truthful or as truthful as we can be?
Yeah, so what I do most of the time is that I think the most truthful is an authentic experience. That means that whenever, let's say, I want to talk about women's American society, I would pick a women's filmmaker, or a women filmmaker, so a women author, to provide her own experience talking about this very specific problem. So I would pick someone's perspective and someone's contribution to the problem, just like we do the same with novels, for example, right? We also use novels that talk about someone's experience, for example. Right. I consider film to be an equal source of source of experience, sharing experience to literary work, for example. It's not the truth itself, but it's a truthful, how do you call it, whenever you share your story experience? Yeah, so it is someone's experience and you have to recognize it, so you always recognize the author behind, and then obviously you explain that it's this person's experience and she talks about this and that from her point of view. So I think this is the most truthful kind of cinema that you can have, right? Even more truthful than, I would say, documentary films. If they are authorial, that means that whenever they are by an author talking about her experience, then I think this is really the most truthful part of the experience. I don't know.
What do you think about projects where you students can talk about their lives in like short movies and like, I don't know how to question this, to make this question, but like short movies. What do you think about a project where students can make short movies? Yes.
About short. Yes. Like, what do I think about useful they can be? Or I always consider any cultural product, anything that is produced, carries certain informational value, but also cultural value. I consider it as a piece of evidence, right? So it is your presentation of your it is your story, right? So I always see an author behind that, and it's the author's utterance, right? Something that, or a message, or something that the author wants to share. So from this perspective, I consider also short films as some kind of artwork, right? Because film is art. So yeah, and if it carries a message, then it's kind of an utterance with message. So yeah, it depends on for what purposes. I personally do like short films. I watch a lot of short films, especially on long flights. I watched many Brazilian short films, but they're different genres, so it's very relevant. It depends on the genre, it depends on the author and what it's supposed to be about. So, do you make some? Do you make some short films? At school? Right. What for? Like, well, when you're asked to make short films, what is it for?
Some books, Brazilian books.
Oh, but authors.
Representation.
Oh, representation. Oh, that's cool. That's really nice.
It's cool.
Yeah, that's really, really nice. Yeah, so you get to also work with someone's experience, you put it into some kind of you add a different dimension because you reproduce a story like that.
It's nice.
It's nice. It's cool. Wonderful. Perfect. Yeah, I wish our students would do such things. Have good teachers. Perfect. Okay. Professor Lilia wants to ask something.
When you teach and using movies, the movies used to be in English or in native language?
Yeah, well, it's all in English. I teach in English. Our students study in English, so we use English only. Because I teach American studies, so it's all from this Anglophone kind of a environment. So yes, it's all primarily American actually. We use, for comparison, I also use different films, but it's primarily American.
Can you listen your grade in your native language?
Samozřejmě, já můžu rozhrát po slovensky kdykoliv. No, it's just my daughter who managed to understand. I didn't curse, I swear. So, but yes, I can say something in Portuguese. There is a very important thing that I learned to say, is that eu preciso cafezinho.
Very good one.
I'll survive. Sorry? Pumpuya. I don't know this one.
How can I explain that? It's a sort of fruit, salty, and then you can drink it with coffee.
Ah.
It's savory.
I have to learn this.
Yeah.
Pumpuya.
Before going back to your university.
Pumpuya. Do they have it like in cafes or something? So if I ask for pumpuya?
To find it here. Is it possible, Lilian?
I don't ask the Paraense people.
Yeah.
I don't know. Early morning in the market, in the fruit market, you can find a part. But Ahish is going to find some for you.
Also not every day. Some you have to like read
Okay.
they have some days and some they just I don't know what they do, but some days they have it, some they don't.
You just say, eu preciso de pupunha.
And then you got one.
Okay. Okay, thank you all very, very much for having me. I also hope to see you around. So yeah, we're supposed to have some other classes as well. So thank you.
I'm gonna get the mic now. So guys, I think you guys can say some words to her. Do you know how to say thank in Slovakian? It's dakujem. Can you repeat? Dakujem. So now you add the vocative, Martina, right? So dakujem, Martina. There you go. Thank you. Thank you, Martina, for the brilliant presentation you had. All the questions, very nice. I know, calm down. I'm aware I made this. Okay? So don't worry. Again, tomorrow and Thursday, we're going to have a workshop. If you haven't registered, you should, because we have few spots left. It's going to be in the lab, and you can find everything on FALEST's Instagram. If you're here and you want a certificate, you need to check that QR code right there and put your information. If you don't, you won't get a certificate. Understand? If you want a certificate for this thing here, you need to go there and fill it in. It's not going to be open tomorrow. It's going to close in maybe 30 minutes. So be aware and do what you need. So I think that's it for today. I don't know if Alexandre has something to say. No? So once again, Martina, thank you very much. We're going to be doing everything tomorrow. Guys, you have classes, I think. Who has classes with Thiago? Lift the hand. So you're going with him. Do you have class now or they're free? Ricardo's students are free to go home and the other students. But I believe we should all take one picture together now. Right, Elani? So everybody come here, I think. Todo mundo vem aqui para frente para tirar foto. Estou vendo pessoas saindo. Não é para sair, é para tirar foto. Primeiro, todo mundo aqui na frente, por favor. Please. What? O quê? Dá tchau para eles. So everyone there, see you. Bye bye. Thank you for watching. I hope you had a good time. And if you are watching, you need the QR code that they're going to be sending to you. I hope so. Thank you very much. Bye bye. I'll kindly ask to the professors talking now to be here for the picture as well. Picture, picture, picture. Foto, pessoal. Vamos, pessoal.